Happy to be joined today by Josh Edwards, who does a lot of work with covering the NFL, college football, the draft for CBS Sports.com. Josh, thanks for taking a couple minutes to hit on some of the things you've been writing about recently.
Of course. Happy to be with you.
So let's start with the piece you just filed a couple hours ago. It seems like Sony Michel being acquired by the Rams. How much of this is something of a second chance for the running back after his tenure in New England?
Yeah, it's absolutely a second chance for the former number 31 overall selection. He goes to Los Angeles to play with Sean McVay, who's one of the most respected offensive minds in the NFL. He had been bypassed on the depth chart by Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson, a rookie who has had a good training camp. So he's just getting a better opportunity with Los Angeles, who has already lost Cam Akers to injury earlier this offseason. So great opportunity for Sony Michel. Now let's see if he can make the most of it.
How good do you expect the Rams to be this season?
They could be very good. You've got Matthew Stafford coming in via trade. You've got Sony Michel now. So you've got to incorporate some of these new pieces. You lost Brandon Staley, the defensive coordinator, who has since become the head coach of the Chargers. So you're integrating a lot of these new pieces, and you're hoping to get that it comes together very quickly because the season is just a couple of weeks away. But I think Sean McVay's team is well equipped to handle those changes. They've got a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. And I think as long as Matthew Stafford is able to stay healthy, they will certainly contend in that division.
I know because you work the draft so diligently, you're plugged into the NFL, but also into the college football scene and the elite players who are eventually going to be drafted. And one of the things that I think resulted from the coronavirus pandemic is that it almost ripped the lid off of college football in a number of ways in terms of who has the power, not only from the NCAA, but also the conference by conference breakdown. And now we're seeing sort of shifts in that landscape. How would you describe where we are right now with college football and different conferences heading into another season?
Yeah, it's interesting the way that you phrase that, because in a year where so many of us spent time apart, it seems like all of these changes have happened in college football. So you obviously have the NIL agreement where players are able to make money off their name and likeness, where you've now seen Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC from the Big 12. And then there's this report that the Big 10, the Pac-12, the ACC are coming together on this gentleman's agreement in an alliance, which there's nothing on paper. It essentially means nothing. And it really means nothing because when you consider that Texas and Oklahoma were the ones that made the individual decision to leave the Big 12, that just shows that all of the power is with the individual institutions. So if Ohio State, if Michigan, if Clemson, if any of these big schools felt that it was in their best interest to go to another conference, they are certainly more than equipped to do so. So despite this agreement that came out this week, I don't think it changes a whole lot, but I think what we've seen over the past couple of months really is that college football has completely changed as we know it.
In what way has the change been most significant for you from your vantage point?
Yeah, there hasn't been a big shift just yet. I think it's going to be interesting from a recruiting perspective, just how much this NIL stuff has an impact on that and where the country's top players go, because they've always gone to Alabama and Ohio State. But if you're a top quarterback in the country, for example, at Ohio State, they've got 3 quarterbacks that were rated in the top 30 overall players in their respective classes. So for those 3 players, they could have gone anywhere in the country that they wanted to start at quarterback, which is obviously going to open the door to new money for you to earn while you're in college. Some of those players decided to go to Ohio State. They're sitting there as backups. They're probably not going to earn as much money as these starting quarterbacks, the ones that are ahead of them. So does this suddenly create some movement to where we see some of these top quarterbacks go to other institutions where they see an opportunity to potentially make some more money off their name, image, and likeness?
You know, that's an interesting point. From what you can tell, do you think that, and I'm just speaking as a college football fan, you know, who's watched the national championships the last couple of years, do you feel like college football fans want more parity? Are they tired of seeing the Alabamas of the world, the LSUs of the world, what have you, kind of make it to the Final Four and appear again and again? I mean, you look at what Nick Saban has done, and hats off to him for continuing to put together these teams that are essentially NFLB. But with players being able to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness and potentially moving around the country to make a little bit more money, is that something that college football fans want?
I would think so. I mean, there's obviously some very big fan bases at Ohio State, Alabama. I'm sure they don't want to see that parity. They wish the transfer portal wasn't as prevalent as it has become. But I would assume the rest of the nation would be rooting for more parity in college football because everybody loves an underdog story. I mean, we kind of get numb to seeing the Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Alabamas in the college football playoff on a yearly basis. So anytime a Washington or, an Oklahoma are able to crack that barrier and be that other team, I think those teams get a lot of supporters. So the fact that we're expanding to 12 teams in the college football playoff is obviously going to open some doors for teams to potentially make, more of an impact in recruiting, because suddenly you're playing on a more national stage. You can pitch that to recruits who can then pitch it to companies that maybe want to endorse them. So maybe that creates some of that parity. But I think college football fans would absolutely be on board with somebody else that can make a dent in the claim of an Ohio State or an Alabama or a Clemson. It's just not realistic right now. So that's going to be one of the interesting trends to watch in college football over the next 2 years if some of that recruiting starts to get a little bit more evenly passed around.
How do you expect this year's class of NFL rookies to perform this season based on the talent that you've seen in assessing the draft and following some of these players closely from their college careers to the pro game?
Yeah, I think for some, the transition will be seamless, and I think for others, it will be a little bit more difficult. What we've seen in training camp with 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round of the 2021 NFL draft, that's all anybody wants to talk about, whether it's Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Mac Jones. It doesn't matter. Everybody wants to know how those players are doing. And depending on when you ask and who you ask, the answer is, yeah, they've looked pretty good. I mean, they could possibly start for their respective teams early in the season. But the reality is this is all just preseason. So a lot of the rookies that we're seeing are not going against starters. It's very contextual in the way that you have to break this down. So while we've seen some flashes from each of these rookie quarterbacks, it's going to be the regular season is going to be the most telling in terms of where they are in their development. But I think we have seen some positive developments from each of those 5 quarterbacks, and I think we're going to see them all at some point this season.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I feel like Justin Fields, preseason performance has varied drastically. Trevor Lawrence came out, did okay. And then I'm thinking about Mac Jones is an interesting situation in New England because everybody was kind of singing his praises and his arm strength and his ability to be a game manager. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. The Eagles didn't have anybody defensively to even present a challenge. So it is all relative when it comes to the preseason. But is there anybody that you would give the edge to, quarterback or otherwise, heading into the year where you're like, listen, this kid is going to have a phenomenal season?
Yeah, so covering the draft, we look at the players, we look at the skills, we try to project them to the NFL. But one of the biggest components that gets lost in those projections is the teams that they're going to, the head coaches that they're going to be around, the systems that they're in, the supporting cast, all of these contributing factors to how rookies can translate to the NFL. That's why you've seen Justin Fields have a little bit of a misstep in Chicago in his last preseason game. That's why you saw Trevor Lawrence have some hiccups in the preseason. So I think you're looking at the supporting cast, the head coaching that's in place. And for that reason, I think you look at San Francisco with Trey Lance and Kyle Shanahan. I think that's a perfect match. And even in New England with Bill Belichick and Mac Jones. Bill Belichick has shown that he's not somebody to be overlooked. Over the past 2 decades, you certainly want to give him the benefit of the doubt. So as long as he's got a first-round quarterback, you have to look at that team as a contender, as a team that's going to make some kind of impact in the NFL this season because he commands that level of respect. So those are two great situations that I think these rookie quarterbacks are walking into. Now, are they going to be able to supplant the veterans that are ahead of them, whether that's Cam Newton or Jimmy Garoppolo? We'll find out. But I think at some point, both of those players are not only going to get an opportunity to start for those respective franchises, but I think they're going to be playing in some meaningful games as well.
So you expect a quarterback change potentially mid-season in New England, just something that we haven't seen for a while. Not saying that, Mac Jones is the next Tom Brady, but you think that that's potentially a likely scenario if Cam Newton ends up starting there?
That's the reality of most quarterbacks being taken in the first round. We saw Patrick Mahomes, who sat out an entire season in Kansas City behind Alex Smith, with a really talented Kansas City team that felt like they were in the mix, even with Alex Smith. But when you look around the NFL, history just tells us that these first-round quarterbacks are going to see the field at some point. It's just a matter of when the right time is, because a lot of these teams open with some difficult schedules, and maybe you want to bring that rookie in slowly. Maybe you want to bring them into a home atmosphere rather than throwing them to the Lions. But yes, I expect all of these quarterbacks to see the field in a starting capacity at some point this season.
All right, Josh Edwards, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it. Best of luck this season.
Of course, anytime. Thanks for having me.